Hello, pattern readers. It's Thursday, and that must mean we have another Wheel of Time on Prime teaser to talk about. And, more importantly, another Q&A from showrunner Rafe Judkins. There's so much to talk about here, so I just can't wait to break it down with you. My favorite part of What Wednesdays are Rafe's Q&As, and there's a lot of really fun stuff and important stuff to talk about this time. First, we're going to fire up that teaser. I am probably going to have to cut out the audio for most of it because otherwise YouTube hits me with a copyright violation since I can't get permission to use that music. But I'll give you some commentary over it before we get to the Q&A.
So we start off with a page of the script, and I will come back to this so we can talk about the details of what's in here. Then we see, similar to the sword reveal, moving from a sketch of the guitar to a 3D model to the actual physical instrument being built, and then it gets placed into a scene.
Donation for the Gleeman.
So someone saying donation for the Gleeman. We don't know for sure who that is. I would love it if that is Tom's voice. It sounds like it could be. Also wanted to point out that someone noted that the design of this guitar seems to feature what looks like a mustache on it, which is very cool and fitting for Tom's character.
Donation for the Gleeman.
Now for a close-up on that script. It says, she nods her head to Tom Marilyn, 50s, who's finishing a beer as he heads back up to the stage carrying his guitar. Tom is wearing the patchwork of color on the inside of his cloak, identifying him as a Gleeman. So, of course, we get an age range for Tom, and that fits with the actor they have cast, Alexandre Willaume. Some people commented on the use of the word beer as opposed to ale or cider. Honestly, I'm not concerned about that at all. But the more interesting thing to me was the description of Tom's cloak. This says the patchwork of color is on the inside of his cloak, and that is what identifies him as a Gleeman.
So, obviously, this cloak is different than the book description, where the multicolors of the cloak and the patches are just the entire cloak, plus the patches flutter. But there's a couple things that I like about this design choice. So the first, when we think about the way Tom flourishes his cloak in the book, it's a little silly sometimes, right? Obviously, everyone can tell he's a Gleeman at a glance from far away, so he really has no need to be flourishing it all the time. But with this design choice and the colors on the inside, he can sort of flip the cloak out and reveal the multicolored patches. And so it actually then makes sense that he is advertising himself as a Gleeman in that way. The other thing that I like is it gives him the opportunity to keep the cloak closed and have it appear just more like a normal cloak. So he's not always advertising the fact that he's a Gleeman, and he can keep a lower profile when he needs to.
Now, the Twitter account for the show challenged people to see if they could unblur the lines of the script that we really can't read. I have no idea how to do that, but this person made an attempt, and I figured I would just comment on it. He is suggesting that perhaps Rand is asking for someone with silver lines through their hair, or a big man like a blacksmith, that's just part of it, and then a maid responding, only silver-haired one is the Gleeman, best quiet down, he's supposed to do one more song.
So I have no idea if this Twitter user is right or close to right, but if he is, it would suggest that we do meet Tom during the time when the party is split after Shadar Logoth. I previously talked about this being a possibility because of the way I break down what we're likely to see in episodes 1 and 2, where we have no confirmation of Tom's actor being present. And we do know that he's in episodes 3 and 4. That's probably during that Shadar Logoth split. So I am leaning in that direction as much as I would like to see him earlier, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later with one of Rafe's answers.
So we're moving on to Rafe's Q&A on Instagram, and his first question was, who's the most significant season 1 character you invented for the show? The answer was, there's no one fully invented. Anyone new is either a character pulled from somewhere in the series and changed, or a composite of groups or types of characters personified in one individual. Other than Steve, obviously.
Love the little joke about Steve. I'm delighted that the creative team is at least aware of some of our fandom shenanigans. But on the substance of this, all this really tells me is that with thousands of named characters to choose from that they don't have to completely invent out of whole cloth. They can at least use some existing details like names when they have to come up with something that doesn't exactly exist in the books. But my guess would be, in practice, there are going to be some minor characters who feel completely new. They're just using some existing material to create that. It also suggests that we don't, at least so far, have any major, completely new feeling characters. But I wouldn't be surprised if, as the show goes on, you do see some major existing characters used in very different ways than they are in the books.
Next, how difficult was it to change or leave out characters from the books for screen adaptation? Sometimes very difficult, obviously. People who drive the story or shed light on our characters' backstories or the world of the show always will be more likely to make an appearance. But some people are there in glimpses or subtle nods just for our enjoyment. Some extras were named as characters and given things/looks from the books, so keep your eyes peeled.
This probably tells us more than anything that there are going to be little Easter eggs that book fans should watch out for. Of course, there's going to be a lot of minor characters that don't have any presence or any significant presence in the show, but these little subtle nods might be just the right details to remind us that there are book fans involved with this production.
In this one, when he refers to Sarah N., that means Sarah Nakamura, the show's book consultant, just in case you weren't aware. Her question was, how many times did I give you blank stares when discussing possible changes? Rafe says, this one is obviously from Sarah N. There were moments when a thrilled room full of writers would go, we've cracked it, it's amazing. But can, insert book canon person/place/thing, be, insert non-canon idea instead. And Sarah's resounding, withering stare would tell us to go back to the drawing board. R.I.P. Perrin talking to a bear.
This was actually one of my favorite answers. At first glance, it seems like the part about R.I.P. Perrin talking to a bear was just kind of funny. I wasn't imagining it as something that anyone pushed really hard for. But no, apparently this was actually a really serious discussion. Sarah gave us a little bit more context.
She explains that the reason there was a serious consideration about removing the wolves from the show was because they were worried about it being too similar to Game of Thrones. She had to educate the team about fantasy tropes, including the use of wolves, and she actually wrote 3 different essays fighting for the wolves to stay in the show, which they are. So well done, Sarah.
This was fascinating to me, and I guess it's not that surprising. There are going to be people working on this show who don't come to it with any previous connection to the books. And to them, I can see them looking at it and just saying, oh, wolves are too similar to Game of Thrones. So honestly, thank the creator for Sarah Nakamura being involved with this production because she literally saved the wolves for us. Can you imagine Perrin, the bear brother, instead? I just can't.
Next. In the books, we always enter the story on the wind. Will that be a convention we see a lot? We've tackled the wind in the pilot in what I think, at least, is an unexpected but rewarding way. Excited to see what you all think of it.
This should be fun. I don't really have any kind of strong opinion on what this might look like. I see it as, again, one of those just little subtle nods to book fans, but hopefully whatever it is will also look cool and will make for a strong opener.
Do you have to change character personalities for a screen adaptation? We try not to. Most of our job is about making sure that we create a story and scenes that can tell the audience about character motivations and why they're doing something they're doing when we can't just drop into their head and say it like you can in the book. This often results in some of the biggest changes, but they're ultimately put in to make sure that the character on screen is as emotionally true as possible.
This one is important. For me to feel like the show is true to the source material, the plot can change in 1,000 different ways, but the characters really need to feel like themselves. But there's a second really important point here, which is that a lot of understanding character motivations in a book comes from the character's internal thoughts. This is always going to have to change for a screen adaptation. Sometimes that can be through dialogue, but a character can't always say something that they think. There might be nonverbal ways that this could be done, but this is going to mean that a character does something that they might not do in the books. And it might not be subtle sometimes, because subtlety isn't necessarily going to work to make things clear on screen. A lot of small details might fly over viewers' heads when a lot is happening in a short time frame, unless they make something really dramatic. All of that is to say, I think it's very possible that characters might do major things in the show that they don't do in the books, and part of the reasoning for that is going to be to show character motivation. Showing with action rather than telling with words is more powerful, and subtlety often just isn't going to cut it.
Next, were there any changes in earlier drafts of scripts that were scrapped in final version? Yes, tons. We are never afraid to try something and see if it works. But then that has to go through Sarah and me. I drive the writers as crazy as anyone with sticking to the books. It also then goes to Brandon Sanderson, Harriet McDougall, and Maria Simons, who've been huge helps in checking us and helping us go back to the drawing board on changes, or many times saying that works and giving us permission to release a tiny sigh of relief.
This one should be very reassuring to book fans because we have 3 members of Team Jordan, Harriet, Brandon, and Maria, who all had the opportunity to weigh in and to tell the team to go back to the drawing board if there were changes suggested that they felt didn't ring true. Plus, of course, we have Rafe and Sarah, who are massive book fans themselves, in addition to being professionals working on this production.
Are there some major characters that appear in the first book that won't appear in the first season? Yes, and some of them are still slated to appear in later seasons. Again, approaching the adaptation of the series, not just each book individually. A few of these characters I bet you already expect this for, and one at least I think will surprise you.
Okay, here's where we can start to speculate a little bit wildly. Obviously, what is considered a major character is open to interpretation. I'm going to list the ones that I think might qualify that we don't have confirmed castings for yet. The obvious ones would be the Trachans, including Elaine, Morghese, Gawain, and Galad. Attached to them are also Elida, Gareth Bryn, and Talonvor. I did a whole video already talking about the different possibilities for these 7 characters in season 1, so check that out if you haven't. We also have Ishamael, Aginor, Balthamel, the Green Man, Elias, Bael Doman, and any of the Faldara characters, but most notably Ingtar and Lord Agomar. I've already speculated previously about some of these characters that I think will not make it into season 1. Of the ones I'm most confident are going to be cut from the first season, I would say Elida, Elias, Talonvor, Gareth Bryn, and probably Morghese and Bael Doman as well. And I think at least some of the Forsaken will not make it in. And I also would not be surprised if the Green Man was cut either. So the ones I'm holding on to a little bit more hope for are Elaine, Lord Agomar, and Ingtar, and to a lesser degree Gawain and Galad. I'm just a little bit less sure about them. And probably at least one of the Forsaken will make it in, but it doesn't necessarily need to be Ishamael. It maybe even shouldn't be, because I would say I think it's a good idea not to have Rand confront him too many times, or it might become repetitive. So maybe it could be Aginor instead, though it could be any of them. I should also say that even these ones that I think are a little bit safer for season 1 or more important to introduce early, I could be completely wrong because they might have a very different vision of the show.
Have there been any major locations or cities you've had to cut for budget, time, or logistics? This is perhaps the biggest source of changes for us. Even with the massive amount of money Amazon has kindly given us to bring this world to life, to go to as many unique cities, villages, locations as they do in the books is simply impossible. We have chosen to do a few places extremely well, both culturally and with production design, instead of doing dozens of places cheaply and badly. This results in many changes that have huge ripple effects. If you can't go to Baerlon, do you still meet Min? Do you still encounter the White Cloaks? Do you still have dreams of Baalzamon, etc.? I'm betting that most things that feel the most unnecessarily changed to people from the books, even if they're hugely separated from that specific location, will be born out of a location-specific change.
Rafe had said something similar to this in a previous Q&A, suggesting that we were going to have a lot fewer locations in the show than we do in the books, and that it's a purely practical issue. It makes total sense. Who's going to have the budget to do dozens of different locations in great detail? But it's important what he says here, stressing the ripple effect of those kinds of decisions that they have to consider. He mentioned Barillon specifically. I'd previously thrown out the idea of, well, maybe we have a brief stop in Barillon. It seemed pretty clear we were not going to meet Min there, but we meet White Cloak somewhere, and I mentioned that. After this answer, I would say, no, Barillon is going to be out. But we don't have another village in between Barillon and Shadar Logoth, and we know that we do have Tarn Ferry in the show. So my thought is that we're probably going to meet White Cloaks in Tarn Ferry, sort of combining Tarn Ferry and Barillon from the books into one location, which makes a lot of sense.
Next, do you attempt to keep book dialogue or start from scratch? Every writer receives a document when they begin their script put together by our book expert, Sarah, that breaks down every scene in the episode and gives specific dialogue and scene references from the books for it. Especially for scenes that aren't from the books at all, we will find scenes from the books with the same characters together or talking about the same thing thematically. That said, predictably, almost all the dialogue in the show is not from the books, so as to sound as natural as possible with our locations, actors, scenes as they're played.
I don't really have much commentary on this one. The only thing I have to say is that I hope when a line is iconic, they try to find a way to work it into the dialogue of the show. It might be fun to do a whole video on iconic lines from book one that I hope they work into the show somehow.
How far through the series did you consider when making changes in terms of repercussions? We have to consider it for the entire series, which has led to many in-room conversations/screaming matches where someone is like, the yellow sister healing someone in this scene cannot be Chesmal Emery. Are you kidding me? Do you know anything about Chesmal Emery? What, did you just Google a random yellow sister name and pick one you liked? Fluff you and your yellow sister. It's not going to be fluffing Chesmal Emery. I guarantee you that.
This is a great answer. I think this is exactly what they need to do to avoid having major complications later on that could have been avoided. I talked about this a little bit when I did the breakdown of Rafe's Q&A after Tam's sword reveal. But again, I'm just increasingly confident that they have the big picture in mind. Also, this anecdote about Chesmal Emery was hilarious.
Have you made changes that hurt you or Sarah to make but were necessary for the screen? The writer's room floor is littered with my tears. Truly, though, I don't want people to be unprepared for how different the show is to the books. To do a proper adaptation, it has to be. As a thought exercise, just imagine we can only do 4 of the cities from the Eye of the World. So from Emond's Field, Tarn Ferry, Barillon, Shadar Logoth, Whitebridge, Four Kings, Breen Spring, Camelin, Faldara. Which do you choose? What are the knock-on effects for character and story from the ones you don't go to? Which characters haven't met each other now, and how can you reconnect them? We have amazing writers and hugely helpful support in Brandon and Harriet to tackle these changes, but they're not small. Gird your loins, my friends.
Here we have probably the most important answer. To do an adaptation like this, there are going to have to be big changes in the show compared to the books. No one knows this better than Rafe or Sarah do. They're the ones sweating and crying their way through trying to make this material live in a different medium. But he's telling us this is the way it has to be, and that we should be emotionally preparing ourselves for the show to look very different than the books do. It has been said many times before in the fandom, and I don't know who said it first, but I do believe the best way to think of this adaptation is as another turning of the wheel. The text itself gives us this gift, because time is cyclical. The Third Age comes around again and again and again, and every time it does, the details of how it plays out are different, even though the major events are probably the same. Well, that's exactly what we're going to get here in this adaptation. Imagine the ages have gone all the way through and we've come around to the end of the Third Age again, and we're seeing it now play out in a different way. It's not the same turning of the wheel that the books were about. So only you know if you're someone that needs to work on being okay with this idea. But if you are someone who's genuinely upset about the change from a harp to a guitar, you might be one of those people. And I hope you can work through that, or that idea helps you be able to enjoy the show in a different way. Now let's have a little fun with that thought experiment. He gave us 9 names of villages and cities from the first book and suggested that we might only get to see 4 of them. I think we should remember that is a thought experiment. I don't think it's literally possible that there are only 4, but let's talk about which ones might be in and out. I think the ones that are definitely in the show are Emmonsfield, Tarn Ferry, Shadar Logoth, Faldara. That's 4 right there. Almost certainly Camelin is in as well. It will have to be in eventually. And we know we have Basil Gill in season 1. We also have to meet Loyal somewhere, and we have to get a Waygate somewhere. So that leaves Barrelon and Whitebridge, which I'm pretty sure are out, and Four Kings and Breen Spring, which are both along the Camelin Road. I'd honestly forgotten the name Breen Spring. There are other villages along the road that Matt and Rand visit that he didn't mention, like Carysford and Market Sharon. That did make me wonder if he mentioned Breen Spring for a reason. But if I had to bet, I would say we probably only get one village along the Camelin Road. And the one that has the most significant events, the most memorable name, is certainly Four Kings. So if I had to bet, I'd say that might be the one.
Last Instagram question was, what made you change Thom playing the lyre to a guitar? Thom is a good example of changes made for the show. For one, I want characters to appear when we have the time to spend to properly introduce them and get enough scenes for them to attract a great actor for the role. You will never see scenes on this show where 4 random people appear, say 2 lines, and then disappear for seasons. It just won't get you the caliber of actor you need, and it doesn't properly intro that character to the audience. So for Thom, we wanted to give him a proper introduction, and we also wanted him to have a strong masculine energy that made a counterpoint to Moiraine. We saw actors of all ages, races, and vibes to play Thom, but when Alex Willaume's tape came through, we knew he was Thom and moved toward his vibe for the character, which was younger and grittier than Book's Thom. The guitar looks much more fitting in his hands and with his voice than a lyre. When he stomps onto stage in the show, it's a moment, and that's what we wanted for Thom. Never fear, multicolored cloak is still in existence, but different than you imagine. Isis, our costume designer, nailed it.
There are things I really loved in this answer. The fact that Thom needs a proper introduction. This, to me, explains why he would not be introduced in episode 1, because there's too many other characters being introduced there. He'd be lost in that mix. So I speculated about that previously. It fits right in with that. He needed enough scenes to get a great actor. So that makes me hopeful that we do get enough of Thom in season 1. The other part that was kind of fun was him having a strong masculine energy as a counterpoint to Moiraine. Although it is looking more like he's not really going to interact with Moiraine directly, but still it says something interesting about his character. I also do really appreciate what they said about looking at a wide range of actors for Thom and feeling like they had the right one when they saw Alex Willaume. I do think it's right to tweak a character a little bit for the right actor. I do. And so he's describing Thom as younger and grittier than Thom in the books. Let's face it, this Thom is going to be a sexier Thom as well. Thom in the books is supposed to be like 10 years past his prime. This Thom is clearly going to still be in his prime. But as I've talked about before, I think it really does make sense to age Thom down slightly for the show, given that they're hoping to be in this for the long haul and the likely physical demands that they're going to place on the actor. So I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on this teaser and Rafe's Q&A. What were your big takeaways? And give me your best Thom predictions for season 1. So make sure to leave a like and a comment and subscribe if you haven't for more Wheel of Time content breaking down how these books are being adapted for another turning of the wheel.